Good evening, Dr. May here. So my name is Gavin, and I am I'm completing the bi-monthly video. And the story, the first story that I read was from Ernest Hemingway, Big Two-Hearted River. And say we had to answer different prompts. The first prompt being, why does Hemingway devote 3 long paragraphs to descriptions of moving water and the swimming trout at the beginning of the story? Well, the story begins with him leaving a train. He stops in the town of Mealy, and that town has been burned down. There is nothing left. He says there used to be 13 saloons, different big mansions, everything, and it is all burnt to a crisp, burned to the ground, burnt to just the foundation showing, and he gets off the train. He is looking at the river. Not only is it foreshadowing him fishing, but it's also his life, because you do some deeper research and different reading, and you find that, he is struggling with this trauma. And as the story points out in the beginning of the trout, they are swimming very tightly. They're making swift movements. We can make a lot of swift movements in life. We can really just, a lot of times life can just go by really fast. We don't know what's going on, and we just have to sometimes just slow down. And that might be a major reason for why he's going on this trip, because he is in search of the alpine forest, the pine forest, where the grass is lush, the meadows are lush, where he'll set up his camp. He fishes, and he loses a very big trout, one of the biggest trouts he's ever seen. And like a fisherman that I am, I would be pretty disappointed if I lost a fish as big as what the story's portraying it as. I fished, I have been bass fishing before, and I've caught a very big fish. But anyways, so back to the story. I just think, just foreshadowing and just kind of a deeper meaning. Everything always has a deeper meaning. I think it's just about his life. He served, and, just the trauma, that life is flowing in some cases. And, the trout portrays him, and the fact, again, with the sporadic movements, with being in an enclosed space with the river, how the river is only so wide and so long, but it somehow keeps flowing. That, again, I keep repeating myself, is like life, because life, it keeps on flowing. Every day comes to an end, whether good or bad. Every day will at some point come to an end, and that the life just keeps flowing. And he follows the river, and he finds his spot. He follows a road next to the railroad. He drives, he follows the road. He reaches the pine forest. He lays down, he takes a nap, and he gets ready for the night. He makes his tent, he makes his dinner, beans and spaghetti, puts tomato ketchup on his food. It sounds really good. I've been camping before, and it sounds like a perfect campfire food. So I think that's what the reason for Hemingway is, just foreshadowing. That's my big reason, and also just to portray, it's symbolic. It's symbolic of his life and his state right now. And moving into the second question, where does the climax of the plot occur? I think the climax is at, here, and I'll moving my phone so I can read off. So I have a quote on page 283, the fourth and fifth paragraph down. It says, "His mouth dry, his heart down, Nick reeled in. He had never seen so big a trout. There was a heaviness, a power not to be held. And then the bulk of him as he jumped. He looked as broad as a salmon. Nick's hands was shaky. He reeled in slowly. The thrill had been too much. He felt vaguely a little sick, as though it would be better to sit down." So it's the disappointment, He was, at one point, it was an exhilarating moment, and at another point, it's like, darn it, I just lost a really, really big fish. I have felt that before. It sucks. It makes you just want to sit down and just think about giving up. But no, the climax of the story obviously is in part 2 here on page 283, whenever he loses, one of the biggest fish. He's never seen so big of a trout. Could be the very biggest fish in his life. He goes out, camping. He trucks all the way through the woods, through the meadows, through the burnt, rugged terrain that he goes through. He's there, he's fishing with crickets. So he has all of his gear. He has onion sandwiches with him. He has everything with him to have a great day, and just to sit there and just be like, man, I lost really, really big fish. And that also just it just portrays, how exciting the moment was. A very high, intense situation. He was in search of the big trout. He caught little trout. He's not interested in the little trout. He is interested in the big, big trout. And he tries to fish for them, and he's very unsuccessful. And yes, that's climax. And then going into the third question, it says, what does Nick's decision to stop fishing before he goes in the swamp tell you about his character? Well, like previously stated in the first question, it talks about, or I talked about, his trauma. How swamps are. They're dark, dingy, dirty. They're not really used a lot. They're very, murky water. And I think a reason, one, it is very hot outside, obviously. So it just tells that he's like hesitant, he's very hesitant to uncover something. He's very hesitant to explore those waters. And, and that says a lot about, like, in life, that we never know what people are going through. And sometimes it's very hard to hear the truth, and that the truth can hurt sometimes. And the trauma that Nick has been through, he's obviously bottling it up. He's not telling anyone. I mean, he's on a camping trip on his own. That should tell you, like, he's trying to disconnect from, I guess you could say, life, from, just being one with nature. It's just, it just, I'm sorry, I am blanking. Sorry, I'm absolutely blanking. I so apologize. I think about his character, it just says that there's something underlying trauma that he's not wanting to explore. He goes to the river, he fishes at the river, he ends up catching some small ones. Say he's fishing, he isn't interested in the small fish, he's interested in the big fish. And he knows that the big fish, are in the swampy, or not the swampy, but are in the cool spots, in the dark shaded spots. And him not wanting to go there again it is portraying that, there's something going on in his life and that there is trauma, and again, we all have trauma. I'm turning this into about life, but it's so true, like we can all relate to Nick on some level, is that we all hold some sort of trauma in our life. Or if you haven't, that is very good. It's good on you. But in life, a lot of people struggle with, stuff that has happened in their past, and they're not wanting to really reveal it. And the thing about that is that, sometimes that what hurts the most is the best thing. And if that is, if that's uncovering that area, then, that's what needs to be done. But yeah, I just wrapping up this tangent, just about his character. He's very, what's the word? He's very independent also with, the way he walks, he sits down in the smoldering heat and he lights a cigarette and he smokes the cigarette, and he sits there and he sleeps underneath a pine tree. He's very independent. He's trying to escape from the noise, whatever noise has been going on in his life, and is trying to come together as one in nature. In part 2 of the assignment, we read Richard Brautigan's story, The Cleveland Wrecking Yard, which the Cleveland Wrecking Yard say it has a weird beginning, and I will talk about this. It says, why does Brautigan write a long introduction to the story before his narrator takes the number 15 bus on Columbus Avenue in San Francisco to ride out to the Cleveland Wrecking Yard? Say the story that I get, so we picture a wrecking yard, it's where, a wrecking yard is where, they throw away scraps. They throw away different items, which is, it can be old. And I think what they're trying to get, why he would write a long story, I guess, is to introduce the theme of reusing. You have a mule being used. They have just a lot of different themes. So I can go to the very beginning of the story on page 75. He talks about a mule in one of the very first paragraphs of page 75. It says, my other friend bought an iron roof at the Cleveland Wrecking Yard and took the roof down to Big Sur in an old station wagon. And then he carried the iron roof on his back up the side of a mountain. He carried up half the roof on his back. It was no picnic. Then he bought a mule, George, from Pleasanton. George carried up the other half of the roof. Say, I have never really heard of someone using a mule this day and age other than overseas, different. I don't know who would use it these days. Different. I do not know. And also about a station wagon. A station wagon is a really old mode of transportation. It is an older vehicle, and I just think that what the reader is really trying to portray, the introduction, to establish tone and introduce themes of decay and reuse, and just to build anticipation for the rest of the story. And the second question of this story, what details about the items on view in the Cleveland's Wrecking Yard's front window add verisimilitude to the story? And verisimilitude means the appearance of being real or believable. So, just what I would think, what makes it believable, just the workers, they, are humane. They ask, how can I help you? We're selling it by the foot, and we treat them as all if they were China. just how humane it is. You know, they have prices. Um, the wrecking yard, it's next to an abandoned gas station, a self-service wash, railroad tracks, piles of lumber, all of that. And it it just makes it look real. The blend of specific pricing, practical items, detailed sales talk, realistic setting. Um, Whenever the reader, this story has been very exaggerated, like previously stated, how, they were using mules to move iron roof up to the top where a mansion sat. You know, to a station wagon being used. Everything has just been exaggerated. This is what makes it real. And the final question is, how does Bradogin's inject a note of pathos into his description of the trout stream and the fish, vegetation, and insects associated with it? So, say Bradogan, he injects a note of pathos into his description of the trout stream by, by placing something beautiful and alive inside, I guess you could say, an industrial commercial setting where it does not belong. The stream is described as clear and cold, and when the narrator, when he puts his hand in the water, he was saying how it was getting cold, which creates a moment of genuine tenderness. Or he was saying, it was cold and it felt good. And that just creates a moment of tenderness. And there was also this melancholy tone.